Welcome to The Whole Pineapple. I'm Ruby Boris.
And I'm Ann Judge. The Whole Pineapple is a podcast about wellness focused around fertility. And on these weekly mini episodes, we bring you bite-sized ideas for you to snack on.
Like breathing exercises, book reviews. Maybe we'll review some scientific research, or we'll share some wellness and fertility stories from our listeners.
So if you're looking for a tip or a trick related to your fertility and well-being, then you've come to the right place.
Let's dig in.
Welcome back to The Whole Pineapple on our snack. We have been chock full of genetic counseling information this week. And if you listen to our earlier episodes, you know, we kind of teased this one because this may be the topic that people already might have more home experience with. We're going to talk about direct-to-consumer testing. What does it mean if you've done like 23andMe or Heritage or any of these things? Even I think about with my dog, like everybody else, swab and find out their ancestry. So we are so thrilled to welcome back SRM's own genetic counselor, Rachel Donnell. Hopefully you listened to her full episode about mosaicism where he talked about her amazing bio. But she is back today to talk about what is this stuff that you can just do at home and read your report online?
Thanks for having me back again.
Welcome.
How do you respond when you meet with someone and they tell you, well, I already did, one of these at-home tests?
Yes, well, it happens frequently, but probably one of the first things I'll just tell a patient right off the bat is that we cannot use a direct-to-consumer genetic test to diagnose or treat. So I cannot upload your test result to your medical record. I can't use that to dictate kind of path moving forward. And if you did do a test that identified possibly a mutation for maybe cystic fibrosis or what have you, maybe a carrier screen test that you did, I have to validate that through a diagnostic laboratory. So I cannot use that test result. I have to go reconfirm it. So that's probably one of the first things I'll tell people is, 23andMe is a fun test. You get to learn some information about yourself, but, medical providers cannot use it for your treatment.
And why is that? What's the difference with like how they're doing their testing versus what the tests that clinical laboratories use are?
They just don't have to go through all of the same rigor that a diagnostic laboratory has to go through to validate a genetic test. It's funny, I was talking to my partner actually about this a little bit. And, one of the things we were thinking about is the Apple Watch. You know how the Apple Watch, you can download apps and it can tell you like your heartbeat and your respiration. And he had downloaded some sort of app that he wanted to use for sleeping, like learning about his sleep cycle. And, one of the things it did was it looks for respiration. And he was noticing, oh my gosh, like, my breathing actually drops down a little bit at night. And we were talking about this and I was saying, it's interesting because patients, bring me their 23andMe result and want me to do something about it. But, you're not bringing your Apple Watch to your doctor and saying, hey, my respiration has gone down. So now I need a CPAP machine. Please give me that. No, we have to do more testing to, validate what we've seen in this kind of fun test that you did that, isn't the same rigor as what we do in the healthcare field. So it's an interesting thing. You can learn about yourself. It's fun. But when it comes to diagnostic medicine, we certainly have to do a more rigorous test to make sure that it was actually accurate.
What is funny on the website, I mean, if you read the fine print for any of them, they all have that little disclaimer, right? Like these results should not be used as an indication, or they kind of tell you from the bat, like
it's not diagnostic. And, yeah,
I took a screenshot of it because I was going to read it for the audience today.
Oh, yeah, let's do that. I'm curious.
If you go to 23andMe or really any direct to consumer laboratory. So really, what direct to consumer is just the fact that you can order it yourself. You do not need a medical professional to sign off on it. So that's what really direct-to-consumer genetic testing is. You order it yourself. One of the disclaimers says this test is not intended to tell you anything about your current state of health or to be used to make medical decisions. These carrier reports are not intended to tell you anything about your risk for developing a disease in the future, the health of your fetus, or your newborn child's risk of developing a particular condition in life. And these results should be confirmed in the clinical setting before taking any medical action. So you have it straight from the direct-to-consumer companies that, this is supposed to be fun, interesting, learn about yourself, not intended to diagnose and treat and be used in the medical setting.
That's great. I know when I've heard you talk about this before, you kind of bring up the fact that it is possible to, on their websites and their published materials, kind of look into what they're basing their results off of. And a lot of times they're using really pretty small studies, right? Like that they will say, oh, this is a variant or this isn't. Like, can you talk a little bit more about sort of the difference in, what they're using to tell people what a result is, if that question even makes sense?
So they are using many of the same technology that a diagnostic lab would use. What I would say is that we're just not looking for as much in a direct-to-consumer test. So a negative test on 23andMe is not as reassuring to me as a negative test through a diagnostic laboratory, right? So detection rate is what I'm talking about. Not only that, we have to worry about potentially, in some cases, the accuracy of what is actually being reported out. People like to talk about how they've got their raw data from 23andMe. So, people will say, hey, I got my raw data. And I've had somebody try to give me like a zip file and try and analyze their raw data. And I'm like, you need a diagnostic laboratory to analyze this kind of stuff. But sometimes you can even get very inaccurate results or kind of interpretation. So I guess kind of the next piece is, how are we interpreting the data that we're getting? It's not as rigorous as what you would get in a diagnostic laboratory. So in fact, there was a study done in 2018 that was published in a journal called Genetics in Medicine that followed 49 patients who believed that they had a mutation based on analysis of their raw data from direct-to-consumer testing. And when those patients were retested in a diagnostic laboratory, they found 40% of the mutations that were reported in the raw data were false positives. Many of these mutations, quote unquote, were actually classified as completely benign at the diagnostic laboratory. So this gets back to like people and even the algorithms and processes that we have to analyze genetic variants. It's very different in the diagnostic setting as compared to using a company to analyze your raw data, for example. So it really highlights why it's so important to pursue a diagnostic test through a diagnostic laboratory as compared to analyzing your raw data.
I just pulled up one of mine. I did two different ones. There's a couple of things with it, but what are the things that they advertise for is they have all these special reports, right? So you get to learn, like, let me pull one up here. Oh, body odor is one. Oh. Are you more or less likely to have body odor? Or earwax? Your genotype for earwax type shows that you have inconclusive results.
Bummer.
But there's all sorts of things. There's, energy and taste. Like, are you one of those cilantro soap people? But the results come down to as you are more likely to, or you are less likely to. That's not a you have this or you don't have this.
Exactly. And when it comes to these kind of more fun ones that aren't like genetic diseases, quote unquote, what they are doing is they have used what's called GWAS, so genome-wide association studies. So there are researchers that go, they'll take a population of people, say, that have brown hair, and they'll look at different areas of your DNA, and they go, oh my gosh, for all of these people that have brown hair, they have this particular little code at this location. It's all the same. But when I look at blonde-haired people, they don't have it. Then we can conclude, well, if you have this particular code at this area, then you are more likely to have brown hair than blonde hair. But the complexity of this is that we are now talking about the genetics of things that are not purely genetic, right? Or not necessarily linked to one particular part of your genetic code. So earwax, like I have to imagine there's got to be environmental aspects to that as well, right? Totally. That we can't just look at your genetics and tell you if you're going to have a certain type of earwax, or maybe your earwax changes over time or throughout, the seasons or how old you get or something. So these kind of fun reports that you get are just more genetically complex, which is why nobody will ever be able to tell you definitively, if you have this marker, you definitely have thick earwax. So it's just very complicated, but again, kind of fun. There are association studies that have looked at some of this stuff that can help us predict more likely or less likely, but not definitively.
Yeah, it says I have a moderate likelihood of being allergic to cats and a low likelihood of being allergic to dogs, but I've never had any issues with any cats. And as soon as we got my dog, then I started getting allergies. So
exactly. So it just goes to show for these like multifactorial things, genetics is not the full picture.
Especially when it comes to like the metabolism and like how your body processes different nutrition. There's a lot more to it than just your genetic makeup for how that plays out in your life.
Exactly. It's that nature nurture conversation here at play again.
For the rest of all time.
And of course, working in a fertility clinic, we certainly hear stories on the other side about people finding out things they did not expect to find out from these results, paternity issues, all kinds of things where, just like if you listen to our main episode, I don't think people should do a test if they're not prepared to deal with whatever information they might be gathering from that. And so things that can just seem like kind of a fun thing to do. If you're actually going on and uploading and sharing this information, and this info is out there and it could find things that you might not have really wanted to think about.
Yeah. And fortunately, people recognize that now more than they did back when this stuff launched. But funny enough, I've actually had coworkers that I work with at SRM that have called me and told me, I found that I have a half sibling from this testing. Like, is this real? And, I'm telling them, yeah, it is. You probably do have, a relative out there that you didn't know about. The testing, it's still relatively accurate, right? Like, you're not hearing reports of, hey, 23andMe told me that this person is my sibling and they're really not. More so you hear it the other way. It told me I have this sibling and we did confirmatory testing and it really was true. Certainly is something that you got to be prepared for if you do one of these tests. And it's actually something that we talk about very frequently in the egg donor, sperm donor world as well. So I work in SRM's egg donor program. And so part of my job is screening potential anonymous egg donors for our program. And one of the things I talk to them about is that, hey, 23andMe, Ancestry.com, these companies that people do for their ancestry, people are finding their relatives through these companies and keeping in mind that it also only takes one genetic relative of yours for somebody to be able to find you. Because I've talked to potential egg donors before and they're like, well, I haven't done that testing. Yeah, all it takes is one relative that has done it. And that is how people can find you, and that this process may not be confidential or anonymous anymore. So it's a big conversation nowadays in the donor conceived world as well.
We don't even use the term anonymous for our donors really anymore because no one is ever truly anonymous these days.
Yep. I'll tell them, we maintain your confidentiality, but we can't maintain your anonymity.
No, that's a really good way of putting it. I've done 2 different companies. So why does one say that I am, which I already knew, very firmly of Irish and German heritage, but this other one said, I do have a little percentage of Italian heritage, which was new to me. Why?
It is because different companies are looking at different areas of your genome. It's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's just that depending on where you're looking at your DNA, you can have background from one country or another. So it can tell you maybe overarching themes like you are Caucasian, you are largely European, but harping too much on countries of origin is probably not appropriate because while it's fun and interesting, we're just looking at different areas of the genome, and that's why you can have that variation from one to another.
Yeah, it's fun for like tracking.
This is probably not within your area. Since my dog's a rescue on the page for her, like all these people love to post their results with their dogs to see, and like they'll do the same thing. People will test with 3 different companies and it'll be a completely different mix of dog breeds. But sometimes I see that they're also posting reports where they're saying, and that means that my dog has a risk of a hip dysplasia or this and that. And so I feel like this is happening in all these areas too, where it might on one sense be trying to just kind of give you fun info, but it's also trying to make predictions about health. And I don't know that in pets or people, they have enough data to really back that up.
Yeah. And it definitely varies on what we're talking about. So like the earwax stuff and the ancestry, that's more fun and maybe not as accurate. Now, some of these companies will report things like, if you're a carrier of cystic fibrosis or, some of these inherited what we call Mendelian genetic conditions. So things that are truly one mutation, one disease, or one gene, one disease. That's actually much more accurate. So for example, if I did have a patient give me a 23andMe report and it says that they are a carrier of cystic fibrosis, I believe that. I believe they're a carrier. Now, I still have to confirm it through my diagnostic laboratory. I can't be charting that my 23andMe patient is a carrier. But I do believe it because there is validity here in some of this testing when it comes to single gene Mendelian conditions. But some of the other stuff is more just research studies. Maybe one, if you went to look for the citation for the earwax thing, Ruby, you might find one citation from, 3 people that did genetic testing for earwax. And so not a very rigorous study. that they're using to make that claim. But for some of the other stuff, it can certainly be more valid.
And that's a great point to point out, because I feel like people that have had a positive test are often all about the confirmation. They're like, yes, I need to understand more. I want to confirm this. I want to know my specific mutation. But the hard part is the other people who people are like, well, I don't need to do testing because I already did it and it said I'm fine.
You bring up a huge pain point of mine. That's exactly what I worry about. I'm not so worried about the ones that are positive. I'm more worried about the people that are negative being falsely reassured that everything is fine. And again, this goes back to how many genetic variants we're looking for in these tests. So, a negative test on 23andMe is not as rigorous as a negative test through a diagnostic laboratory. And then how many conditions you're looking at. So for example, I could be wrong. They could have updated their testing, but I think 23andMe might analyze somewhere around 20 genetic conditions that you might be a carrier of. And we now test our patients for 556 conditions. So, not only are we screening for more in the diagnostic setting, we're also looking for more mutations within those conditions as well.
And they don't test for spinal muscle atrophy, which is a huge thing to want to screen for if you're trying to assess your reproductive risk.
Yeah. In fact, if a physician does use your 23andMe as an okay enough test, they're actually not meeting ACOG and ACMG guidelines for screening for spinal muscular atrophy. So you're actually missing conditions that we decided as a medical community through these organizations that every single patient should be offered screening for before they become pregnant.
Yeah, so certainly something that might be fun to do, get some information about yourself and your heritage and things like that. And these are valid tests, but when it comes to health, and Ancestry, I think, is just completely stopped doing the health testing part of it. But when it comes to health, it's best to talk to your healthcare provider, get that diagnostic testing, and talk to a genetic counselor.
Exactly.
Which is really the case with home tests for a lot of things in medicine, right? Maybe it's a good entry level point, but then you really want to if this is something that you need an answer to, that's something you want to talk to your clinic about.
Yeah, I definitely have had patients be like, well, I did that at home sperm test and it said I had sperm. There's so much more to that that we need to talk about. So it can definitely give you information, but you want the full picture.
Exactly.
Well, this is so great. Thank you for having 1, 2, 3 conversations with us. And we, as you can tell, we can talk about all things genetic for a long time. It was so lovely to have you on. We are so privileged to have your expertise on today.
Well, thank you all so much. It's been so fun talking about my favorite topic.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of the Whole Pineapple Podcast. We hope it was helpful.
If you know someone who could benefit from hearing the podcast, we hope you'll share it with them.
And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review The Whole Pineapple on your favorite podcast app. Every rating and review makes us easier to find.
This podcast is sponsored by Seattle Reproductive Medicine and is produced by Audiotocracy Podcast Production. We'll see you next time. Have a delicious week.